Hello everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, back with more Japanese cinema, diving into the V Cinema Essentials collection, Bullets and Betrayal from Arrow Video. I do have some test discs, which I'm currently diving into at the moment, currently on disc 2, which I previously reviewed Crime Hunter and Zoom Goes the Bullet, which I thoroughly enjoyed. There will be a link in the description below for that in terms of the playlist, if you want to check out those video reviews. And for this one, I will be doing a double bill feature, talking about completely disc 2 and the two films that lie on it in terms of Stranger and Carlos, both released in 1991. So without further ado, let's dive into both of those films. First film on the disc is Stranger, released in 1991, directed by Nakasaki. Quite can't pronounce his full name, so I'm not going to try and attempt to butcher it here. This is a director that I'm previously familiar with, as he's done a feature film, a part of the J-Horror Rising box set that Arrow did previously to the V-Cinema collection, which is another collection of kind of J-Horror based inspired films, more spookier films, lower budget, very similar to the kind of V-Cinema kind of market, more straight to kind of home on demand DVD, some theatrical, some not. And his first film was actually on that edition, named Shikoku, which actually was one of my favorites from the J-Horror Rising box set, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. I thought it was a really kind of captivating film, really good and spooky, much later compared to this one, where Stranger was 1991. This one was 1999, so this is just on the cusp of the early 2000s. So yeah, very interesting director to see previous work and kind of dive into a bit of his sensibilities and his directing style. Now, as the director says on the special features side, which I'll get into in a minute, he basically had an idea for a female taxi driver. Essentially, he wanted to make a film around this idea, and he struggled to find a writer. He couldn't find one to do it, and he decided to write one himself, essentially a whole screenplay, and direct the film and basically go ahead and make it with part of the V-Cinema kind of tearaway kind of produced kind of lineup during that time. And it's really interesting kind of exploring these different types of films so far. They're so different compared to the A-lister kind of, traditional Japanese type films, the big production films that I've seen prior to this. And it's good to see a more scrappier, low budget kind of movies, more experimental in terms of not just the cinematography and the music choices, but kind of performances, and having, younger actors, and, being a bit more riskier. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. There's a sort of authenticity, kind of naturalistic kind of sense of filmmaking. Essentially what Strangler is one aspect being this kind of intense duel/hitcher kind of, thriller for most of the film, in terms of having this kind of maniac go after her in various kind of different kind of scenarios. And then the other side is a woman that it was started quite high. She was basically, I think, embezzlement in terms of being a high up kind of bank manager. I think someone who had access to kind of computers and stock, and someone was kind of wealthy and, kind of very dismissive of other people and how the luxurious kind of lifestyle, as demonstrated at the start of the film. She gets convicted. We never know truly what happened in that situation. We knew that she kind of got snatched, and, her partner in crime essentially also going to prison, and she's couple of years later, she's been released, and she's basically working as a female taxi driver. And the idea of creating a 90-minute film about a female taxi driver, where she has a bit of a dark past, and she's kind of like doing the kind of isolation, kind of nighttime kind of routes and affairs, and she kind of crosses against essentially a psychopath, a complete stranger, which is what the film's title is, someone with a scarred hand who basically just wants to kill her, and there isn't really any true motivation, there isn't really kind of deeper kind of meaning behind it. It's just a maniac going after and targeting this woman that he basically picked up a fare for one day, and he's going after in every sense of the word in terms of his kind of Toyota kind of big truck 4x4 vehicle, sledgehammers, kind of knives, and burning the car. Just a series of elaborate kind of just real psychological torture as well as physical kind of torment throughout the film. And this is definitely a throwback and inspired even from the director's own words for something like Steven Spielberg's Duel, or even something similar to his Hitcher, which has the kind of similar kind of ring and kind of bell towards it. It is very familiar in that kind of sense, while adding his own kind of original idea involved in it. As long as you don't tell Anthony Wong that she's a taxi driver, I think we're going to be okay. And throughout the film, she's constantly bothered by a series of different types of men in the film, whether it being the psychopath stranger that wants to kill her for unknown reasons, whether it's the kid that just wants to have a taxi ride with her and wants this woman to be his girlfriend, whether it's the kind of very clingy, very hands-on kind of, comrade, essentially part of the taxi firm, which have all men essentially, which all want to get hit on her and they all want that one little piece of her essentially, and offering her coffee, offering her a date. And there's one particular guy which is creepy in his own right, basically saying we probably should kiss, and just touching her and basically holding her keys and kind of a vehicle hostage to basically go on a date with him. And someone who has a bit of a strange kind of mini arc in the movie as well. Someone also does come very kind of creepy and strange and a bit kind of hands-on, and it's very much acknowledged and kind of talked about in the film that everyone's very pushy, everyone's very kind of demanding, and she's a very much a young woman who's made a mistake, who fell in love with someone that she probably shouldn't have fell in love with. She kind of got the adrenaline rush, the high of doing something illegal and having a luxurious lifestyle with a partner that she probably loved and cared for, and that isn't reciprocated back later on, as we find out. And she's kind of deliberately isolated herself, closed herself off with various kind of people, and she's doing the nighttime shifts because she likes the kind of the quiet, but she's also getting the drunks, she's also getting the troublemakers and various different types of people that kind of enter that kind of taxi lifestyle style with. So through those sequences, we get a very much inspired kind of Martin Scorsese kind of Taxi Driver, very similar borderline plagiarism, I would say, in places, in terms of how it's shot and how it's kind of presented. But it's gorgeous to look at. It's a very cool kind of idea for a kind of a movie like this, and it's a very appropriate setting, not just to the character and the story, but also just to the tension building and what that allows for in terms of different types of variety of people, and adds that kind of stranger kind of character come into it later on, and adds to her kind of psyche, her kind of position of how she feels, and a stranger character which comes in and immediately tries to kill her, and that's really intense. And you've got the nighttime kind of shoot, and it looks great, it sounds great, it's very intense, and it kind of has this kind of weird kind of drop and go kind of attitude towards it. Essentially, we don't know what her journey is going to be by the end of this film. We don't know if she's going to come out of it stronger or healed or better. It's not the situation isn't a magic wand erasing her kind of mental state. She just very much is a more stronger, capable woman who's willing to kind of tackle the situation. She definitely is scared. She definitely is very vulnerable in times, and definitely almost gets killed quite a few different occasions. But she definitely is very kind of feisty. She definitely is taking charge of situations, and buying a knife. And it's not going to be for everyone. Some people are going to get very annoyed. Some people want the more traditional type of kind of third act kind of resolution. But this doesn't go for that. And I think it definitely is a film going against convention a little bit, and I'm going to see having that kind of creative freedom. And I do like the sub storylines. I do like the bigger kind of scope what the film tries to go for in terms of being a woman against the world. But I think the overall conclusion and where the film wants to go, I think is quite satisfying for me personally. It's my own personal taste, but may not be for someone else that wanted something a bit more kind of traditional for this type of film. It is definitely no hitcher by any means. There are much better films that have taken this type of same idea and done something else with it. But for a kind of a low budget 90s kind of V-cinema scrappier film, great performances, a very interesting kind of story, and even though it is inspired from other movies, I think he does a good job of taking something like Taxi Driver. I think Stranger is quite a unique film overall, and I think if you keep your expectations quite low, I think you go into it into the right mindset, I think you're going to enjoy what this film has to offer. So that's my review on Stranger. Second film on this disc is Carlos, released in 1991, similar to the first film, directed by Kazuhiro, which is interesting because on the special features side, which I'll get into in a moment, he describes himself as a manga artist first, who wanted to become a V-cinema director, essentially. And the reason for that is because he did a screenplay based on his own kind of manga adaptation and wanted to direct it himself and match exactly what's going to be on screen, essentially. And he thought, I can take my experience being a manga of artist, someone who does kind of very specific kind of, imagery and kind of shots and kind of placements in terms of the characters and how he wants to describe kind of tension and moments, and translate it to on screen. And he was given an opportunity by Toei, through the kind of the V-cinema kind of new lineup that during that time, during the 90s. And he asked, can I direct this as well while doing the screenplay? And he was given yes, and he was given great opportunity, not only to direct as a first-time filmmaker, but also get a really high-profile cinematographer, get a first choice in terms of his kind of leading man, which was a comedian during the time, which was not a traditional kind of, action star or a main leading man. And there's a lot of kind of just all going well for him in terms of being a unexperienced filmmaker, similar to some of the other directors involved in this kind of V-cinema collection. So a unexperienced filmmaker that came from a manga background, got his first choice of main leading star and his cinematographer, crazy kind of 90s kind of attitude where like, hey, we've got nothing to lose in terms of a big major studio. We're basically bleeding money here. Let's give them to thirsty up-and-coming talent, someone who wants to make a screenplay, someone who wants to direct, who wants to star in these films, and we'll give them the opportunity to go and do that. And I think it's an interesting kind of experiment, an interesting kind of creativity that comes out of the back end of kind of Japan and this time around, and it's something so different compared to some of the more traditional films I've talked about on this channel already so far. And I think Carlos, for me, I think unfortunately is the weakest so far of the 4 movies that I have seen. And it's interesting on the special features side, which I'll talk about in a minute, which talks about being the top 10 V cinema films of all time, and it's very highly regarded. A lot of high praise Carlos gets straight off the bat, and you can tell this is a film which a lot of people like, and I'm kind of surprised ultimately by the results of the film. And maybe that's just down to my modern sensibility, maybe that's down to perspective in terms of seeing many of the films in the same kind of space. But at the same time, I have seen previous V cinema movies before this film, and I've got a different kind of journey for each one. All 3 films have been quite different, and this one is a bit more samey, a bit more traditional than I would like it to be. What is also trying to be different at the same time, I don't think it quite works and achieves exactly what it's trying to go out for. I do appreciate it, and I do like the more technical aspects of this film more than the actual characters, the more the story that it goes for. The film itself, Carlos, and the main character of the film, with the same name of course, is a Brazilian Japanese immigrant who basically is messed up in Brazil, who's done something really, really bad over there, who's basically had a lot of crimes, basically come back to Japan to hide out, have a little small little operation selling weapons, has a small little family unit of characters from different nationalities, and basically is selling weapons and doing little businesses with the yakuza, the more established, more traditional yakuza family. And then there is a bit of a turf war going on, very traditional, and the film's kind of selling point, what makes it a bit different and what makes it a bit more V cinema in terms of its freedom, is exploring not necessarily the yakuza side and all the more traditional kind of structure that we usually see, but the kind of the outsider, the kind of the underdog characters, the Japanese Brazilian kind of immigrant, the American association with yakuza, someone who is essentially a yakuza hitman who's happened to be American, and you've got other nationalities, different types of characters that are circling around this kind of bubbling situation that happens. You've got a kind of rival turf war between 2 rival kind of yakuza families, very traditional, very samey kind of thing. And you've got these outsider characters in Carlos, who's been hired to basically go and take out the head of the family. And through a series of circumstances that doesn't happen, and basically Carlos misses opportunity to kind of kill the head of a yakuza type family. This kind of leads kind of riffles and kind of rivalries between the 2 kind of clans, and the person he's been contracted by, who's been hired by, gets really pissed off and really angry and basically takes it out on Carlos, and Carlos is having none of it. And it's kind of got that kind of madcap kind of energy towards it at times. It's kind of very similar in terms of something like maybe Miami Blues. It's the kind of best comparison I can kind of think of. A central main character which is in real life a comedian in terms of comedic actor, someone who's not the traditional leading man, not the muscular type, not the kind of the hero type character, someone who's very scrawny, someone who's very kind of rough around the edges, a bit vulgar at times, and someone who delivers on his word. If he's going to kill you, he definitely will kill you for sure. And he goes through a series of kind of betrayals and back and forths, and all leading to a very traditional type of third act kind of sequence where everyone gets killed, and there are kind of violence kind of in the streets, and people getting killed left, right, and center for different reasons. Being completely honest, very, very bored, and I was really struggling to kind of get through what this film has to offer. While the storyline I think is nothing special, I think it's been done countless times before, and it has that very kind of samey, kind of very familiar type of yakuza type of setup in terms of the blueprint. What I do appreciate having a very more an interesting kind of cinematography, and its kind of technical aspects, I think a lot more interesting in terms of how he wants to portray violence, and how he wants to kind of set up these scenes, and how he wants to kind of frame ideas and have dolly shots. And I think the more technical aspects of the film is very interesting and very creative and very fun. I think the storyline, I think, is just very uninspiring. And while I do appreciate the idea of having different nationalities and how they intertwine, how they work in the kind of yakuza world, we have the kind of the pure Japanese kind of essentially community-based organized crime, essentially. And it's some interesting kind of comments that do come from the film, this idea of kind of a more modern sensibility of 90s kind of attitude, where you've got the more old school samurai kind of guy with the tattoos, and you've got the more next generation, which basically wants to wants to basically have the luxurious lifestyle without actually working for it, without actually, you know, having blood in the streets, without retaliating, without, you know, taking arms or going to prison. And it's very much a reflection of that time period. You know, while I want to be yakuza and badass and cool, but also don't want to do the expectations of a yakuza going forward. They don't want to go against the cops. They don't want to, you know, ruin their image essentially. So we'll have the American associate kind of yakuza hitman come in to do the job for us. We'll have the Brazilian Japanese kind of immigrant come in and do the job for us. It's always the outside people doing the dirty work, where they want to maintain their status and their kind of position. Well, on paper, I do think that's a really cool idea, and I think it's a really interesting kind of concept for a film, which I don't think it's terrible in terms of how the film is presented necessarily. I just think how it's delivered, how it's paced, lets the whole film down, and I think it gets really kind of dull and really kind of stiff and just doesn't really go anywhere interesting. I don't think the characters are particularly that fun either. The American Terminator essentially is a brute. The Carlos character, I think, is just, again, very obnoxious and just very unlikable, not fun. Just kind of a bit of a sociopath, especially towards more the third act of the film, which is a bit more understandable in terms of where it goes. Even some of the more kind of down, kind of low-key sequences, the more kind of conversational moments, I think are quite dull and quite uninspiring. The film is stringing you along way too much for my liking, and I don't think there's enough material here to kind of make it satisfying enough for a repeated reviewer. So I definitely think it's the weakest out of the collection so far, and not one that I would revisit. While I do appreciate what the technical aspects is, I do appreciate the vision and doing something a little different. I very much could be down to personal taste, I'm not too sure, but for me, this film didn't really deliver compared to some of the previous films I've watched so far on the set. I don't think it's something that I would be returning back to anytime soon. So yeah, Carlos, take it with a bit of pinch of salt, keep your expectations low, see for yourself, see what you think ultimately going forward.
But disc 2, we have newly filmed introduction to both films by Japanese film critic Masaki Takayama. We have Stranger Than Fiction, a newly filmed interview with Stranger writer and director talking about his experience with the film and the process of making it. We have From Manga to Films, a newly filmed interview with Carlos, writer and director, discussing his thought process for going from script to first time filmmaking. We have An Extra Round in the Chamber, a brand new video essay on Carlos by critic and Japanese cinema expert Jonathan Clemens.
Now, in terms of the special features with these films, I think this is when you get some really kind of interesting, very juicy, behind the scenes, deep dive into the making of these films from the director's own mouth themselves, being the fact that both of these directors wrote these films as well for their individual projects, being Stranger and Carlos. I think both were absolutely wonderful special features on this edition. I really like the fact they've gone back, found these films, restored them in HD, and also delivered brand new exclusive interviews from the director's own mouth, talking about their history with Toei and the V Cinema kind of legacy, how they were given a lot of creative freedom in terms of having casting, their style of directing, in terms of the action, non-action, cinematography-wise, and just taking a few more risks and just being more creatively liberated essentially going forward, and just making these really kind of lower budget films that weren't going to get cinema releases, but just having more creative control ultimately, and just having a bit more artistic expression going forward. And I really like the extras on both these kind of films, talking about their individual projects and their backgrounds beforehand, and being very transparent and acknowledging their flaws and what they could have done better, or what they think was the right approach at the time, or what their inspiration was. Really appropriately length in terms of 15 to 20 minutes, and just give you a really good sense of them as individual people in terms of directors and artists, while also talking about a time and a place during the 90s, making a creative, fun film, and hopefully getting a good reception behind it. Not to mention, you have the Japanese film critic doing introductions to each of these films during the start, about 15 minutes as well, giving a bit more of kind of a background, a bit more of a kind of a pre-context to what this film is and how it is established within the kind of the V cinema history, what the film's perception was like, and give you a bit of an insight into the kind of production just before watching the film. One thing I will say about these kind of introductions for disc 2, on the other hand, is that it does ruin some of the kind of the action moments, or towards the finale. It does reveal a few more spoilers than I would have liked to sin, being the fact I don't know anything of these films and I'm getting full-on clips of the ending of your film. I don't want to see that, so maybe keep that in mind for disc 2. So that's been my thoughts and opinions on Stranger and Carlos, both released in 1991. What are your thoughts and opinions, guys? Please comment down below. Would you recommend these films to anyone as well? Have you seen these films before? In the meantime, guys, Amphlett Reviews, signing out.